Good evening. Welcome to Intro to Programming for March 11th. This week we're talking about file manipulation with Python. So we'll be talking about reading files and reading files. So there's a bit of background in the notes. I won't go too deeply into it because it's a bit lengthy, but there's essentially two types of files that we care about, one of which is a text file, and that's a file that you're familiar with, even if you don't know that. It's a file that just has ASCII characters in it, so letters and numbers and symbols, things that you find on your keyboard. So a Python file is a text file, and you've undoubtedly dealt with text files in other areas. And that's different than something called a binary file. A binary file has strictly numbers in it, okay? So if you were just to look at a binary file, it wouldn't make any sense, okay? You're just gonna see a bunch of random numbers. It takes a program to decode the data in the file to make sense of it. So example of a binary file would be if you looked at a Microsoft Word file. If you were to look at it outside of Word, it would just be basically a whole bunch of random information. Because it's not encoded as letters and numbers and symbols. So we're only going to be concerned with text files. They're much easier to deal with and still quite useful. So if you want to read more about different types of files, please do. It's in the notes. And for our purposes, we don't really need to know that much about it, except to say that we'll be working with text files. Okay, so another couple topics before we get started on the Python. So on Windows, which most of you are using, also I think on Mac, most file names have two parts. They have the actual name, which usually describes the contents of the file, and then there's something called an extension, which usually tells you what the type of file is. And by type, I mean, is it a Python file? Is it a Microsoft Word file? Is it a PDF file? Is it a zip file? Okay, so the letters after the dot usually give you a clue as to what the file type is. So that's just kind of an FYI. Probably won't affect our usage too much, but it's good to know. And the other thing that we'll run into is something called a file path, and that's the location of the file on a computer. Okay, so computer hard drives are organized into a hierarchical structure, and we'll look at that in just a bit. What it means is that there's many different locations where you might find a file. They're not all the files are not located in one spot. A path is sort of like an address, like the address of your house. It tells you, what street you're on and the house number. And a path is kind of like that in that it tells you where the file is located. So in this little chart here, there's some paths that you would see in Windows. Okay, Windows paths usually start with a letter like A, B, C, D, E, F, G. C is the typical name for the main hard drive. If you have multiple drives or a backup drive, it's going to be something like D, E, or F. And so the path looks something like the letter followed by a colon, followed by the slash, / I guess that's a backslash, sorry. The slashes separate the various folders on your computer system, okay? So look at that in just a second, but in Windows, you have C, and then you have a users folder. Under that, there's usually a folder that matches your login name. Okay, so I have K number here because at Kirkwood, if you happen to be using a computer, they're organized by your K number. And under that, there's folders like documents, downloads, and some other things. Okay, but there are many different paths. And if you open File Explorer, which is a Windows program that will let you basically look through your file system, okay? And each one of these names here is a folder that contains files. And the one that I'm selected here is called Python files. So we're going to be reading and writing to this folder just to show you how that works. So this is a particular folder, and the path is C:/ forward or / users / BG Huggin, which is my username, / documents / Python files. And then inside that folder are the files. So I have some Python programs, and I have a program called myfile.txt, which is a text file that just has 2 words in it, hello world, okay, on separate lines. And we're going to actually be reading this file as part of our programs. And I guess that's probably all I'll say about paths. There's one more important thing, but we'll get to that in a bit here. Okay, so moving on to Python. So far with Python, we've written programs, and once we write the program, it's done with. There's nothing. You know, we haven't been able to save our work. We haven't been able to, you know, resume our work, right? Because we haven't dealt with external files. So once the program is done, it's done, and it's no longer in the computer memory, and it's vanished. So we have to be able to deal with files. With most programs, you need a file to save the work that you're doing. Okay, so you can think of, you know, obviously Microsoft Word. If you create a document, that is a document that lives on your computer so as a file. And when you close Microsoft Word, that file is still there. And later on, you open it. Okay, so that's the same type of your work. Save whatever, you know, thing that you're building for later, or give it to someone else. And essentially, it just lets you save data for some other purpose or for reading later. Okay. So in Python, we can do a bunch of things with files. We can open them, which means that we set up the file such that we can access it. We can create a new file. We can read data from a file. We can write data to a file. We can append to a file. Append means to add data to the end of an existing file. And we always close the file at the end. If we don't close the file, sometimes it can lead to problems such as the file getting corrupted or possibly even deleted or not saved properly. So it's important that we close the file each time we open one. Okay, so to use files, we're going to use some functions, some new functions that we haven't discussed before. And the first one is called open. Okay, open is a built-in Python function. And the way that open works is you give it, as the first parameter, you give it the name of the file, in quotes, and then you give it a mode. The mode is how you want to access the file. So the modes that we care about are R, W, and A. R means to read a file, which means all we're going to do is read it. We're not going to modify it. I'm not going to change it. Write means to write a file. And when we write a file, we are erasing an existing file. So that's kind of important if you every time you open a file to write, you're actually going to erase the content. So if you have a file that you want to save, then you don't want to open it to write it. Okay, you want to open it in another way, like you want to append to it. So that's kind of an important note. That's the W mode, and the A mode means we want to append to a file, which also, so the other thing about writing a file, if it doesn't exist, it creates the file. And the same with append, creates a file if it doesn't already exist. And the mode is simply a letter inside quotes, so it's a string. Now, the open function returns something called a file object. So a file object is a type of Python object which has functions. So we have dealt with objects, but we haven't really studied them yet. That comes at the end of the course. But an object is just a Python entity that has functions attached to it. Okay, so that's one way of looking at it. But we'll see how it works when we get to some examples. Okay, so the first example is we're opening a file to read it, and so the general format of everything we're going to do is we open the file and we assign it to a variable. I usually call it F just because it's short and it stands for file or file object, but you can name it anything. And then we give it the file name with an optional path, and then the mode, and then we perform our operations. So to start with, we're just going to read from the file. So there's a function that is a part of the file object F called readline, which reads one line from the file. So if we look at a text file and we look at this, so a line is, so this would be line 1, this would be line 2, and we can add more stuff in here. So each one of these is a separate line. So read line will read one line from the start to the end. Okay, so the first line is hello, the second line is world, third line is 1, and then 2, and then 3. Okay. And then this little snippet of code prints the line, and then we close the file. Okay. And I think I'm gonna skip that for now. I'm gonna skip this because I'm going to actually work through an example, which I think will be easier to understand. Okay, so a couple things here. So the first thing we're gonna do is our file name is going to be in a certain path. Okay, and the path is optional. So the first we're going to have a path, and then we're going to not have a path, and you can see the difference. So the path is where I just showed you using File Explorer. C users, bghug, and documents, Python files, myfile.txt. So that's the file I just showed you. It's the file that is here in this text editor called Notepad++, which I recommend for Windows. It's a great text editor and it's free. You can just download it. It works quite well. So we have a path, and there's something very important about paths in Python is that we have to treat them specially because of the backslashes here. So if you remember a few weeks ago, we talked about something called escape characters in Python, where if you had a \T, that was a tab character, and a \N was a new line character. Well, those slashes unfortunately confuse Python when it comes to paths, because it thinks that these slashes are actually escape characters and it messes up the path. So there's a notation that you just have to remember, that whenever you're dealing with a path in Python, you should put this R, the letter R in front of it. And that basically tells Python that this is a path and you should ignore the escape symbol, or the backslashes. I don't know why it's R. I don't know what R stands for, but that's the letter. If you do that, you won't have any problems with paths. Okay, so you just have to remember that. So moving on here, we're opening the file, and I'm going to use the file name string that I just created. Okay, and I'm going to open it to read, and I'm going to read a line. So I'm going to read one line, and then I'm going to print the line, and then we're going to close it. So let's run this file and see what we get. So we run it, you can see it prints hello, so that's the first line, and then program exits. Okay. Well, let's read another line. Same thing. Well, now we have hello world, and we can keep going. Okay. But this is not the optimal way to read a file, because if there were 1,000 lines in a file, we certainly don't want to read, we don't want to have 1,000 read line statements. That would be silly. Okay, but it just shows you that each call to read line reads one line in the file. Okay, go back to the notes. So obviously we want to do it more efficiently. So the way that we generally do things when we have a repeated type of statement is we put it in a loop. So we have a loop that reads until we get to the end of the file. Okay, so we'll start out the same. We'll read a line, and then we'll have a loop. And we'll say while line is not equal to an empty string, we're going to go in the loop. We're going to print the line that we already have, and then we're going to repeat the statement to get the next line. Okay. And so now if we run this, you can see it prints the entire file. Hello world 1, 2, 3. Okay, and if we open this file, indeed that's what we have. Okay, so a couple things to note here. So it turns out that each one of these lines is not just the text that you see. There's also sort of an invisible new line at the end of it. That's why you see the blank lines here. These blank lines are not part of the file, but they print. Okay, and I'll show you in a second here. So if we go into this this text editor again, we can turn on show symbols. Just show white, show end of line, show all characters. I'm going to show the end of line. So there's these sort of invisible characters in a text file and most files that you don't see as symbols, but they're there anyway. And in Windows, there's actually 2 bytes, 2 ASCII characters. One is carriage return, one is line feed. Carriage return is an old typewriter statement that means go back to the beginning. Like if you've ever typed, you know that you move the platen to the left when you're at the end of when you're done typing a line, and then the line feed moves it down to the next line. Okay, so these 2 characters are a new line. In Python, that would be a new line, the \n character. And so when Python reads these, there's actually a new line at the end of each line. So print also has a new line. So you're printing, you're doing a new line, and there's a new line at the end of the string. And so therefore there's 2 new lines, and that's why we have this extra space here. Okay. So you have to be aware of that. And I'll show you in a second how to remove that extra blank line. But this condition here for the while loop. So if the string, let's go back to this. Okay. Let's add some extra blank lines here. Okay, so you see every time there's a blank line, we have these two invisible symbols. So let's turn that off, because it's just kind of annoying to have that. So there's some blank lines here. And what you'll see is when we run this, even though there's nothing on those lines, it's still going to print them. So there's a bunch of blank lines here. So it turns out that there actually is a character in each of those blank lines, and the character is this character, \n. Okay, so if we want to, we could actually even do this. We could say if line is equal to \n, print new line. So that proves that there's something in the line, even though we don't actually see it in the file. It translates into a \n character. Okay, so if we run this, you see now we have this new line statement that we printed, because it actually does have something. So if there is nothing in the line that we've read, absolutely nothing in that string, then that means we've reached the end of the file. Okay, so the end of the file is here. So we read 3 and we read again, it reads absolutely nothing. There's nothing on that line, and that means that we've reached the end of the file. Okay, so that's why we can use this while line not equal to empty string, because empty string means we've reached the end of the file, there's nothing more to read, and we're done. Okay, so I'll get rid of this. Okay, so we still have that annoying extra space, extra blank line here. So when we print it out, this we don't want these extra lines, these extra blank lines. That just makes it hard to read, and it doesn't look like the file, right? There's seemingly extra stuff there. So what we can do is when we print it, so the line is a string, okay, and the string is a string variable is actually an object, okay. And as such, there's a bunch of functions associated with the string object, just like with the file object. And one of those is called strip. And what that does is it actually gets rid of the usually call it non-printable characters, but it's things that don't have symbols attached to it. Okay, so things you don't see, like tabs and new lines, and I believe spaces as well. Okay, it's things that aren't characters and aren't numbers and aren't visible symbols. So that it gets rid of those from the beginning and the end of the line. All right, so let's do a little program just so you see what that does, because it's maybe a bit of a confusing concept. Okay, let's say we have a string equal to a bunch of spaces and then a number and some more spaces. Okay, now if we print that string, what we're going to get is, so we have a bunch of spaces and we have spaces that we don't see at the end. Actually, we kind of see them because if I put my cursor there, it only goes that far. So there's spaces at the beginning and the end. Now, if I do this, if I say string.strip, what I think is going to happen is it's going to get rid of the things at the beginning and end of the visible characters. Okay, in this case, it's 1, 2, 3. So let's see what prints out if we do that. And indeed, there's nothing at the beginning and there's nothing at the end because I can't move the cursor beyond that. So that gets rid of, and again, it's only things at the beginning and end of your string. So even if there's spaces in the middle of your characters, that doesn't count. Okay, so it's going to print those spaces. But anything that is, it's on the right and the left of the last or the first printable characters. Okay, so it's spaces. I could have a new line. I could have a tab. Whatever. There's probably others. I'm not sure if there's any others. Those are the ones that we're going to care about. And if I print that, okay, there's nothing at the beginning or the end. If I don't do that, then we're going to get, it's going to look a lot different. Okay, because we have a new line, a tab, and at the end we have some stuff, and then another new line, etc. Okay, so the strip function is useful to get rid of that stuff that we don't want at the beginning or end of a string. All right, so let's get rid of that and go back to the reason why I told you about that in the first place is just because we don't want that extra new line character. So if we do this, now you'll see it looks like the file, because remember the file had some spaces, so the actual blank lines still show up. Okay, because it's the print is introducing its own, every time you print it goes to the next line. So remember there's a parameter you can pass to the print function called end, which we don't want that to happen. We can set end to just an empty string. But let me get rid of that and run it again. And now it looks just like the file. Hello world 1, 2, 3. Okay, so we know that we're opening this file and we're reading the contents and we're printing. Okay. So another thing I want to show you is that that's a file with the path. So if we don't have the path, okay, so if we just say file name equals myname.txt, in this case, we don't need to put the R, we can. We don't need to because there's no escape, there's no slashes, okay, there's no backslashes. So either way, it's fine. So there's no path, so where's the file go? Or where's the file going to be read from? Well, that's a great question. So there's a concept of the current folder, the current location that you're running. Generally, it's the location where you're running your Python file. In PyCharm, it's going to be the folder where your Python programs are located. Okay, so in idle, it's probably also where your files are located. I'm not positive, I think so. Okay. So, and there happens to be a file called myfile.txt along with all my Python programs. And if we look at that file, it's just a bunch of letters, A, B, C, D, E. So let's run this again. Hopefully, yep, it read that file as opposed to the other file, this one. And just to prove it to you, I'll change it. I'll add 2 numbers, save it. And if we run this again, now we have the numbers. Okay. So what I'd like you to do when you're doing your homework, when you're in general, unless I say otherwise, don't have a path, because if you have a path in your program, your path is not going to work on my computer. So when I test your program, it's going to fail and I'm going to have to edit it, and it's annoying to me. Okay, so please don't put a path. Just have it like this so that the file is in the directory where your Python program is run at, and then it's much easier for all of us to deal with. Okay, and I will make an announcement about that too, because I can't remember if it's in the definition of the homework. But okay, let's see. We'll go back to the notes. So reading a file, we've done that. Okay. So we've learned about reading one line at a time. Okay, we can actually read the entire file in. Okay, if we want to, that's a different way of doing it. So let me show you how that works. So instead of using read line, okay, So let's save this. So what I'm doing here, if you don't know, I'm commenting out that entire section of code with triple quotes. Okay, so we're gonna copy this. And that's gonna be the same. We're gonna call this lines because it's going to be the entire file, and we're gonna call this read. And what this is gonna do, and you can do it this way. Okay, I'm not preventing you, but it's returning something called a list, which we don't know what lists are yet. Okay, so I'm gonna print lines, close the file, which we always do. Run it. So it does a similar thing. Okay, but it just has the one line of code which reads the entire file into the lines structure. Actually, I think I have to take this back. Bear with me here. I think, yeah, I'm sorry. I got my functions mixed up. Okay, read actually reads the file into one big string. Okay, so trying to think what's the best way we could do this here. So read returns a big string that has all the stuff in the file. Okay, so the new lines are represented by \n, and everything else in the file is going to be in that one string. Okay, so sometimes that's useful. Okay, but most of the time it probably isn't that useful because if we want to read the file and do something, we usually care about the individual lines. So reading the entire file into a single string is not generally what we want, but just to make you aware that you can do that. Now the third one, which is what I was talking about, excuse me, what I thought I was talking about before, is when we're reading into a list. Okay, so let's just make a note here. Now we're going to read into a list. Okay, which is read lines, I believe. We're going to call this a list. And let's see if that actually works. Okay, so that is indeed a list. You can tell a list because a list has this format. And again, I don't expect you to understand this or worry about it this week. This is a topic, I think next week, I should say 2 weeks from now. But a list has square brackets on each side, and each item in the list is separated by a comma. Okay, so a list is a way to store multiple pieces of information instead of the variables we've talked about so far is just storing a single thing, such as a number, a string, or an integer, a float, or a string. I guess that's basically what we've learned about so far as variables that store data. But a list, you can store a lot of stuff, as much stuff as you want. Okay, it's a useful type of variable, but we're not going to get into it this week. Okay. All right. So there's that. You can also read individual characters. You can read the file one by one character by one character if you want. We're not going to do that. I don't think there's any use for that for any of the programs that we're going to be writing. But you can, if there's there are sometimes reasons you want to read the file one by one, like each character at a time, but we're not going to do that. You can read this in the notes if you're interested in it. Okay, I think we've pretty much covered the exercises. We briefly talked about lists. Okay, if you're interested to learn more about lists and files, feel free to read the notes, but since we don't need that to do the exercises, I'm just going to leave that for an exercise for you to do. Okay, so this set of notes was data files 1. There's another file called data files 2, and that's talking about file creation. See, yeah, so basically we're just writing files. Okay, so now we'll talk about writing files. Let me edit this, uncomment this. Okay. Right, so let's go back to notes first. Okay, so it's a similar process. When we're creating a file, again, we have an open function that returns a file object. We have the file name and optional path, and the mode is different. The mode is W, which stands for write. And then we can write to a file, and we always close the file. So it's basically the same process, except we're writing instead of reading. Okay. So as with reads, there's different ways of writing. The first thing we're going to do is we're just going to call the write function, which writes a string to a file. And it doesn't automatically put a new line. So I will show you that as we go here. Okay. So this is a very simple file. And I'm using the same file name. So the file name is currently myfile.txt. So what we'll do, so right now this file has this contents, okay, ABC, D, 1, 2, 3. So when we open it to write to it, it's going to delete those contents, as we'll see. So I'm going to write a string hello, and I'm going to close it. And we'll see what happens, okay. Now if I look at this, well, you see it now, it says hello. So what was there before is gone, and now it says hello because it cleared that file and it basically started over again, okay. So let me show you about this write function. So I'm writing hello and then world, but it doesn't automatically add an write, unlike print, write doesn't automatically add a new line after the end of each write, as you'll see. So we did that, and if we look at it, you see it just says hello immediately followed by world. There's no new line. So if you want to put these strings on separate lines, you have to do it yourself. Okay, you have to add a \n. We don't need one on the second line, probably. If we run it, now it's on a separate line. Okay, so that's the write function. Pretty simple. Okay, there is a, so there, we talked briefly about the readlines function, which reads the contents of a file into a list. So each item in the list is a separate line in the file. There's a corresponding writelines function, which will write the contents of a list to a file. So why don't I do that one just to show you how this works. Yeah, I'm just gonna save this. open the same file. So we'll say L is a list variable, and we'll put a few strings in there. Let's put colors. Okay. So the way that a list works, and you can put different types of. It doesn't have to be all strings. Okay. We'll just say red, blue, green. So that's our list. And we can do f.writelines and pass the list and close it. What we should see is this file now has red, blue, green. And again, notice that they're all smushed together. There's no automatic new line on there, right? So I don't want to get too deeply into this, but we can print each line one by one by doing this. And since print automatically okay, well, I guess we'll do it this way. This is probably not all that useful to you at the moment since we don't really understand strings, but this is a way to take a string and write it to a file and add our new line characters. Okay. But you don't need to worry about lists right now. Okay, you don't need to worry about write lines. You can just write each line to the file with the write function, and if you want it on separate lines, you can add the \n character to do that. Okay. All right, so append. We can briefly talk about append. It just adds more code to the end of a file. There really isn't too much to it. So if we do that, why don't we just keep that code, and then we'll okay, so this program, first we're going to open the file. We're going to write red, blue, green. And then I'm going to open it again, but this time with append A as the access type. And I'm going to write some more colors, yellow, and let's say brown. Okay. So now what will happen is we'll see the original. Okay, so here's the colors. This time we're going to append to that file, and we should see our new colors, and we do yellow, brown. Okay, so that just tells you that A will add to the end of the file. I don't think we'll need to use append for any of our programs this year, but just to let you know that it exists. All right, so there's some exercises at the end here. Okay, we'll skip, at least for now, records. We may get into records. Well, I think records are something that we may get into when we do the final project. So I'm not going to talk about those just yet. But let's do program 2 here. It says create a program that asks the user to enter a series of numbers in a loop. Exit the loop when the user enters a -1. The numbers and total of numbers should be added to a file called total.txt. Okay. So let's write that program. All right. So we want to call it total.txt, and we want to write to it. And so first of all, we want to get let's call it number. We want to get a number from the user, and we'll assume that it's an integer. So we'll do a cast here. Okay. And while number not equal to -1, -1. So we're already pre-converting this to a number so we can compare to -1. And it says that we want to keep a running total and we want to print. So need to add that. So we also need to open a file to which I guess we've opened a file. Sorry about that. All right, so we have our number. We have our first number, and so we need to write that to the file. So we do an f.write, and we write number. So since number is, we've already converted to an integer, to write it, we need to convert it back to a string. So so in the same way that we cast a string to an int using the int function, we can cast a int to a string using the str function. Okay, so we want to write that, and we want to add a new line. Okay, so we can I don't remember if I mentioned this before, but with strings, the plus operator concatenates a string. Okay, I think I mentioned this, but if you have, let's say you have ABC plus 1, 1, 2, 3. Okay. Oops. That's going to be the same. That's going to result in ABC 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's called the concatenation operator when you apply it to strings. Okay, it's not adding them together, it's smushing them together. Okay, it's concatenating them. Okay, and then so in order for this, in order for us to get out of the loop, we have to read another number, because otherwise it's never going to get to -1. Okay, so that's a common problem when someone has a loop is and an input, that they forget that they have to get the next item from the user in order for the loop to end. Okay. Now let's, and this isn't correct yet, but let's just see what we have so far. Let's see if we have any errors here. All right, so enter a number, let's say 3, 5, -1. Okay, so that's good. So we've got a loop, it's asking us for numbers, and it exits when I enter -1. And it's supposed to put something in total.text. So do we, yep, there it is, total.text, and it has our numbers, so good. So we've got a good start at it. Okay, so a couple more things that we need to do. First of all, we need to add the total, and then we need to print the total. So let's do that. So let's say we need a variable called total, starts out at 0. Total plus equals number, which means every time through the loop, we add number to the total. And at the end, okay, so before we close the file, we want to write, I just want a little separator line there. Remember, write isn't like print, we have to add a new line. And f.write, So total is an integer, so we have to cast it back to a string. Now let's see what we have. All right, so we'll say 3, 3, 3, which is obviously 9, minus 1 enters, exits. And we don't need this one, total.text. Well, we're a little closer here. We got the numbers and a separator and another number, but we're actually, I printed the wrong thing. I need to print the total. Okay, and let's try to make it look a little bit nicer. So let's add a tab at the beginning, and then let's see, what did this look like? Okay, so add a tab character, and then the total, which I guess also needs a. What does this look like again? All right, so it says write total. And then a tab. It doesn't really matter what it looks like, but just to show you how you can kind of format it so it looks a bit nicer. All right, so 4, 5, and 2, minus 1 to get out of the loop. And now the file. Okay, so you get the idea. You can mess around with the tabs and spacing to make it look a little nicer. This is obviously, the columns are not correct or anything, but I think you get the picture. I'll leave it as an exercise to you to complete that. So the point is that we've created a file that's stored on the disk. So when I exit PyCharm, okay, that file is still going to be there. I can look in the File Explorer. In fact, I can do that. I can remember where that's. So see, users, BG Huggin, PyCharm projects, and this project is, so the path you can actually get from here. It's kind of a long path. Projects intro spring 2021. And there's my file, total.txt, which looks the same as what we would expect. Okay. So now that we've saved that file, we could read it in, you know, we could write another program to read the file in. And I think you can hopefully kind of see how now we have the ability to write a program that will let us do something. I mean, you could imagine a very simple, like accounting program where you enter your monthly budget or something, and then it's saved, and then the next time you read that file in and you can edit it. And you know, easier said than done, of course, but once we know how to make files, and then we can start creating more complicated programs that we can do things where we need to save information and read that information for the next time. Or maybe you need to produce a file for someone that has statistics about something, you know, that they're interested in. Or you can make, you know, not just plain text files, but you could make HTML files, right? So you could make a file that you could be a web page. You could make, I mean, really any type of file. Even something like, there's ways you can create PDF files with special libraries and things. But for us, we're just going to focus on text files right now because they're easy to read, they're easy to understand. You can actually look at it and see what's inside of it. Okay, so I think I will call it a day. If there's anything else I think you know, I'll probably make another short video and post it this week, because again, next week we don't have class, so you have a chance to catch up. And please, if you have any questions, let me know. I'm happy to help you in whatever way I can. I'm willing to make, another video to explain the concepts if you're struggling with anything. So with that, have a good evening, and I will talk to you next time. Okay. What the heck is this? There's nothing in there.